Welcome to today's American Security Project webinar. This is an on-the-record conversation that will be available for attribution. A recording of this conversation will be posted on our website. All audience members will be muted during the discussion, but please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask any questions to the panelists. With that, Courtney, over to you.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Before we begin, I wanted to start our audience off with a short thought exercise. Imagine that more than 42% of the United States developed an endocrine dysfunction that caused an increasingly catastrophic effect on other body systems if left untreated. Imagine that people with this dysfunction were 2.5 times more likely to develop heart disease, 5 times more likely to suffer a musculoskeletal injury, 8 times more likely to develop chronic liver disease, and up to 7 times more likely to get at least one form of cancer. One might imagine that if this disease were developed overnight today, scientists and clinical researchers would investigate and test hundreds of methods to treat it, just like they would any other chemical imbalance. Instead, imagine that 48% of Americans believed individuals with the dysfunction were consciously choosing to acquire and sustain it. And even if they did not consider this dysfunction a choice, 58% of Americans believe these individuals should find a way to treat it outside of any healthcare system involvement. What would they recommend instead? Non-empirically based programs not developed by scientists or doctors, but hobbyists and experts in every other subject but health. Despite these methods failing to treat the dysfunction for more than 70% of people in the short term and up to 90% of people in the long term, they are still recommended in an absolute majority of contexts, and people who educate themselves and seek out effective treatment options are considered weak or even morally inferior to those who do not. I don't need to tell you that we're talking about obesity, at least a very oversimplified version of it. But the way doctors and scientists speak about treating obesity today is fundamentally at odds with the fad diet and fitness solutions associated with losing weight in our public lexicon. I think our nation needs a hard reset and a blank slate. This is especially true in the U.S. Armed Forces, where centuries of policy and thought leadership on body composition went into increasing the combat effectiveness and appearance of underweight soldiers, not the health of overweight soldiers. Today, around 22% of active duty service members have obesity, and the cascading impact of this disease on military readiness cannot be understated. In a report released this morning, ASP researchers calculated that the Department of Defense spends over $1.25 billion to treat obesity in active duty each year, without even counting the impact of lost productivity and replacement costs. When individuals are no longer able to serve because they exceed weight standards or suffer from obesity-related complications, there are no longer sufficient replacements in critical positions vital to the nation's defense. Recruiting and retaining service members with obesity is now imperative to national security. Evidence-based treatments should be too. Today, we've brought together 4 leading experts from across the national security and obesity care fields to talk about the current state of obesity treatment in the armed forces, the civilian best practices we can strive for, and the systems and mechanisms we can leverage to get us there. Joining us today is Dr. Tracy Zvenich, Director of Policy Strategy and Alliance at the Obesity Action Coalition, Dr. Lydia Alexander, Chief Medical Officer at Inara Health and President of the Obesity Medicine Association, Dr. Rochelle Corrado, Founder and Director of the Comprehensive Weight Management Association, Weight Management Program at Walter Reed National Military Medical Center, and Stuart Pilch, President of Risk Strategies Consulting and a security and insurance expert. Thank you all for joining. I wanted to start us off by diving a little deeper into why we have this problem that we do and why we think about this problem like we do. For decades, obesity was considered untreatable by the medical community and a matter of willpower and personal responsibility by the public, and in many circles it still is. Dr. Alexander, can you tell us a little bit about how we got to the point that we are today regarding evidence-based treatments for obesity and why it's been difficult to turn the tide of public opinion?
Sure, I would love to. The main reasons that we see obesity being treated not as a disease, and it's really pervasive within the military, quite shocking to be quite honest, but across society and globally, in fact, as well, is because it's been in the commercial realm for so long and treated as a matter of willpower and personal failing. And we do know that if we do change some behaviors or we do try a little bit, or a lot, that we can make, we can make advances. We can reduce, we can reduce our weight. We can improve different aspects of what we're doing. But at the same time, it's a bit like respiratory rate or circadian rhythm. The body regulates all of these processes. And when there's a metabolic dysregulation that occurs and the system is fundamentally broken, the status quo, the regulatory process that is there is not functioning. So we can bypass it for some period of time, but we cannot we cannot keep it where it needs to be. So what we conflate is that getting to a healthier weight or losing weight is really all that we need to accomplish, when there's really a part B. When we lose weight and we get to where we want to be, we think of that as crossing the finish line. And I think that's where sort of where society is right now. And you say, oh, I've lost 40 pounds. I feel great. I look great. Everyone congratulates you. And a year later, you're back where you began again. And it's very, it's very disheartening. And I often equate this to either, pregnancy, that's sort of like the sexy part of, of it all, where you're pregnant, you're glowing, you look absolutely amazing. And then the baby is born, and that's where the rubber hits the road. You have to take care of this child and for the rest of your life, manage it. And obesity is a chronic relapsing serious condition that needs long-term, longitudinal, unfragmented care by professionals who are trained to manage this as a disease. And when we don't do that, that's where we fall short. We can't just give birth to the baby and just let it run around. That's not how this works. And I think that is that mindset is pervasive and continues to be an issue that we don't understand, or we don't think about the second aspect of that, and that's the most important aspect, and it's not as exciting as that first piece.
Agreed. And I think it's anyone who's ever experienced a yo-yo diet can attest, without any program or treatment proven to sustain weight loss on a population level over time, individuals and governments work with what they know, right? Which is diet and exercise. And in the absence of any of these like population-wide perfect solutions, it was a try your best recommendation, given in the absence of that perfect solution. We're not at that perfect solution yet. I'm sure that since there are several medical professionals here, they can attest that there really are no perfect solutions that will work for everybody, regardless of how far along the science and the medicine comes. But we at least have more to go off now than we did previously. And thank you for that comment. At the same time, when we have these solutions, right, when we didn't have empirically proven weight loss methods at all, we developed a series of diet and exercise and fad and lifestyle programs to try and fill the gap in our understanding. And these methods still dominate public perception of weight loss. Despite leaps and bounds in our scientific understanding of obesity, entire industries continue to push ineffective and dangerous, sometimes, weight loss solutions. And some individuals in the military may not know what to believe when faced with many different perspectives from different credible actors in their life, whether that be a commander, a parent, a peer, or their doctor. Dr. Zvenich, you lead strategy at the Obesity Action Committee, an organization that raises awareness and improves access to prevention and treatment. From your experience, what are some ways that our nation can combat this prevailing pervasive obesity misinformation on a broad scale?
Yeah, it's such an important issue that you raise. And like Dr. Alexander mentioned, society needs to catch up with the science. And there's just so much misinformation out there. There's a headline every day. You open a magazine, it's right in your face, right? So there's advice from family and friends. It seems like everywhere you turn, you're getting some information around weight loss, the quick fix, fad diets, but not about evidence-based obesity care, right? So we really have a lot of work to do in that space. And at the OAC, we are the national nonprofit dedicated to serving people who live with obesity. So we do this through awareness, education, support, and advocacy. And what we tell our community members, we have over 85,000 members across the US. What we tell our members is really you should seek care from a qualified, trained healthcare professional. Right. And that qualified and trained healthcare professional should be offering you evidence-based interventions and treatments. And that can look like anything across the spectrum of nutrition counseling, intensive behavioral therapies, FDA-approved medications, or metabolic and bariatric surgery. So there is a range of evidence-based treatments available. That's the exciting piece of where we're at today with the advancements and innovations in the science. There are solutions out there for people living with obesity. So we always encourage people to talk to that trusted healthcare provider. Even better if one is trained in obesity medicine. If you have a hard time, if you don't know where to turn, OAC, Obesity Action Coalition, we have resources for people living with obesity and interested in learning more about what care can look like, where to go, find a provider. We even have a provider locator tool where you can enter in your address and your zip code and say, is there someone in my area? So we offer a library of resources and education about what good obesity care looks like. And, getting something from your barbershop, getting something from the nail salon or mail order without speaking to a healthcare provider, that is not good obesity care. Okay. We want people to, develop that relationship with a healthcare provider that can really deliver quality obesity care.
Thank you. And in the civilian environment, more and more people every day, providers and individuals alike, I think, learning of these evidence-based care methods. I saw a study that said that in 2018, only about 1/3 of medical students ever received some form of nutrition education. And today I saw an article that said that it's climbed to almost 50%. So we're getting there. It does seem like there are improvements. And of course, they take time because large systematic impacts tend to take time. And I know that healthcare in the active duty military has some unique opportunities and challenges. So on one hand, commanders are better able to monitor personnel and get them into doctors' offices regularly. And TRICARE healthcare is universal, which is great. And service branches are able to control a lot more about a service member's day-to-day, right, than governments can control any civilian group, which is another advantage. But on the other hand, military life can be stressful, individuals can have fewer freedoms and a lot less flexibility to make choices, and the physical demands of many roles are hard, even on healthy individuals. Dr. Corrado, what are some of the trends you've seen in military weight management over your career, and how do you see things changing now?
Thanks for that question, Courtney. So I think the problem within the military is that just like in society, weight bias and stigma is pervasive, but I would say it's even more pervasive within the military. Even in basic training or in officer development school, you are taught that you are rated upon your physical appearance and how you look in your uniform. And that's part of your military bearing. And that's how you're rated every single year. And so I think for a lot of people, it's become really hard as they continue to be shamed for their weight and stigmatized, not getting promoted as quickly as others, not getting the job that they had wanted. It's been really challenging for a lot of people. And in the military, you have to do your weigh-ins every year to twice a year, depending on your branch and various restrictions. And the thing is that every single time you do that, you again are further kind of stigmatized for why are you not meeting our weight standards, shame on you, and you get sent to these kind of weight management programs, which I think, every single service branch has these weight specific management programs that are largely focused on the lifestyle modifications. And we know that lifestyle modifications, like we already kind of mentioned, are great from a prevention standpoint, but not the end all be all from the treatment perspective. And I think that's why a lot of people continue to not sustain weight loss outside of these programs. And then that becomes more challenging to them because then they're shamed and blamed again of, how could you went to this program, you lost some weight, but why can't you keep it off? And it's just further shame and blame. And I think really there's been a lack of education in the US, but also within the military, again, that obesity is not a moral injury, and that we need to treat it as a disease. And I think, I think the trends are moving that direction. I think there's so many more providers within the military health system who are recognizing this and wanting to treat their patients and trying to gain traction. I think the hard part within the military is that there's also some other stipulations that have made it kind of hard for active duty service members to get the treatment that they probably deserve for their disease of obesity. And that's largely because there are service-specific policies that are in place that are old and outdated and confusing that talk about how you can't necessarily treat people with medications for anorexic purposes. And I, have been treating active duty folks for a while now, and have talked to a lot of people about the importance of treating active duty. But, a lot of people are fearful of the repercussions of treating people with these medications. And so I have to educate them about how I'm treating a disease process that has, obesity-related complications like fatty liver, sleep apnea, diabetes, et cetera, that we care about, and that I'm not necessarily treating this for anorexic purposes. I think the tides are changing from that front. So there has been a lot of talk in the various service-specific branches about changing lingo and updating these policies that kind of say that you can't necessarily take these medications to then allow people to take these medications, which I think will be a nice change, but we haven't seen any service branch come out with those policies yet, but I'm hopeful that in the near future, some of those things will change. I think the thing to note about TRICARE is that TRICARE has covered these drugs since 2018, which is so different in response to the rest of the civilian community. Colleagues and I just did a utilization study looking at the utilization of these drugs within the TRICARE system since we've covered them from 2018 to 2022. And what we found is that only 0.44% of active duty service members who are eligible for these medications are getting them. And so I think we're still not reaching the people who probably need to be treated. And again, I think it's education first, but also changing these policies that make people think that they can't take them per se, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And this is a great segue into Mr. Pilch's expertise. Mr. Pilch, you have an inside look at the treatments that are approved and paid for the military services through insurance and what the common denominators of these treatments are. So as Dr. Corrado mentioned, anti-obesity medications have been approved since 2018, but there are so few approvals in part due to national shortages and then also kind of sequencing requirements. For example, service members have to take a few different medications before they're able to access GLP-1 agonists, and they may not even be able to get the actual medications that are useful for them, whether that be an agonist or Mounjaro or any of the other treatments that are on the market today, because they need to take 12 months of managed weight control, like self-directed program, and they may not last that long because of the policies that mandate in some service branches initiation of separation action after 12 months. Now, of course, we do look into some of these policies and see that there are not hundreds or thousands of people being laid off with only 12 months of being above weight standards. Retention is vital to the continuation of especially our enlisted and our critical technologies branches, departments, and roles. So it is still a topic that we need to cover. Suppose the DoD wanted to invest disproportionately in obesity identification and treatment for national security justifications. Are there insurance or health policy mechanisms they could leverage that civilian insurance companies cannot? And maybe are there additional challenges that they face as a public entity over those of the private insurance sector?
Yeah, thank you. There, like anything, there's trade-offs, right? So TRICARE is a self-insured plan sponsor, we'll call it that, has the right to decide what's covered and what's not covered. As opposed to if I were in a commercial insurance insured program, the insurance company is making those decisions. One of the interesting things listening to folks is that on the GLP-1s, there are a group of questions that are worth that. These are the questions the insurance companies are asking. Okay. Is this going to have, what steps do I need to put this person through? It comes back to the shame question, all these things that I've heard here today. Okay. But how effective, under what conditions are GLP-1s? So first of all, there are some concerns. This is coming from the carriers. You've got to think about it from the carrier standpoint, because that's who you're dealing with, right? Is it utilization management, number of units? Is it care management, or is it clinical management? We're looking for clinical management here. This is whole health. In the private sector, without any cynicism intended, insurance companies may not be ready to cover some things because they roughly have 30 to 40 on their insured block of business, 30 to 40% turnover in the people that they're covering. So if I say, yes, I want to cover GLP-1s and or in combination with other therapies, because GLP-1s by themselves, I would put forward, are not the solution. They're part of an answer. Okay. But I could lay out the money for the drugs, and I'm not going to benefit from, as the employer or the insurance company, the improved health status of the plan participant, because the 30 to 40% of the people are going to be off the plan. That's different in the military. We don't have that kind of turnover. So it is an investment, and that's the word you use, and I think it's appropriate. I think that some of the issues around the GLP-1s, though, that we really need to think about is what happens with muscle mass. What does it mean long term? I don't want to spend too much time on that, but understanding where they fit, how they fit, when they fit, as part of an overall treatment strategy, but not at the back end per se where they are now. Okay, but there are implications around, as I said, muscle mass, but there are also positive implications that heart and some other things improve. What it can do to musculoskeletal, right? Most musculoskeletal situation, the musculoskeletal condition state or morbidity state in the military is pretty high, given I'm carrying 60-pound packs and all that goes with it. So it's a different set of considerations in the commercial block of business. It should have a different set of answers, okay, for the sake of investing in our national security. The challenge becomes, someone hit on this, access to the drugs. There is a shortfall. There's also, in a lot of cases, some of these drugs need to be refrigerated, okay? So it's the ability to use it. If I'm deployed, how am I going to refrigerate? Now, there's some new drugs coming out that are going to be orals rather than injected and all that goes with it. So there's the logistics of doing these things too. Okay. So I'll just close with, and hopefully I've answered your question. It's somewhat of an apple and an orange on the commercial insurance department market. Understand what their motives and goals and, the definitions of success are. We're talking about national security. We're talking about active duty military. It's a different standard that we need to consider. And the treatment plans for whole health, which is the term I think hopefully the three doctors and I can all agree on, how we manage whole health of that active duty military individual matter. And I'll just close with this. The body shaming question is a real one. It's particularly true for women in the military, right? Women face more body shaming than men. Just in society. But the body shaming for active duty military is a tough one. And someone may be reluctant to come forward because they're embarrassed. So that means a different kind of coaching, different forms of outreach to them. And that's where, if I'm running TRICARE, which I don't, I might be doing some really different types of outreach, identification, without someone feeling like, hey, wait a minute, I know more about you than you want me to know about you. But if we know someone is nearing their weight limit under the standards, why aren't we helping them in any way we can?
Thank you. And Rochelle, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. One, the DoD and the Defense Health Agency recognizes obesity as a disease and has been trying to improve coverage of these drugs and the way in which they're covered and the algorithm and steps which you have to take, which I applaud them for. I mean, the Defense Health Agency Pharmacy and Therapeutics Committee meets annually talking about all these drugs. They met in May. They got feedback from a lot of providers like myself. And they have now made changes to where, first-line therapy is going to be phentermine unless you have a contraindication. And then after that, they're allowing providers to choose between Qsymia, Contrave, Zepbound, or Wegovy, which I think is really great. And I think that then begs to say we need a lot of education in the provider space on, what medication to pick for which patient is sitting in front of you and how to individualize care based on their weight-related comorbidities and the stage or the severity of their obesity disease. But I think, the Pharmacy Therapeutics Committee has been very much eager to improve obesity access and coverage of these drugs, which is, I think, a step in the right direction. And I think that, you know, helping others then recognize the availability and how to do this safely and effectively is important. There's also a group who recently has an IRB approved protocol to study semaglutide or Wegovy in active duty service members who have obesity, and they'll be monitoring for muscle mass and strength functionality with that. So I think the DoD is moving in the right direction of trying to research and study these things. But I think some more specific, you know, stance on allowing these drugs from the get-go and teaching other providers in the military health system how to do it is important. And I know a lot of other providers and myself are trying to help educate other providers on how to do this safely and effectively, because they're all interested and they all want to start helping their patients who are struggling before them. Because I will say, I see a lot of active duty service members who've been struggling forever, and they've been in the military for years, and they love what they do, and they want to stay in, and they want to continue to do, you know, what they're doing for the military, but it's becoming incredibly hard for them. And, you know, I look at them as we're having a retention and recruitment issue, and we have all this institutional knowledge that we need to keep and preserve. And we also need to take care of the people who have been serving us for so long and dedicating their life to us. And so I see even more of a reason to try to help educate the people, to treat the people who are currently in, so they can keep doing what they're doing and then be healthy and well, even when they leave us an active duty service.
Yeah, and it is really important, not just to keep this machine of national security going, but also to respect the lives and commitments of the people who really are giving it their absolute all for our country, giving them, you know, the best case possible scenario for their life and their health, and not leaving it to, you know, public sentiment to shift or for the entire nation to shift. And we know that this is a nationwide crisis. It's not something that's only facing the military. It's facing not just the United States, but nearly every country in the world now. And it's going to continue to be a global problem moving forward. And because of the scale of this crisis, the strategies we put in place now will have far-reaching impacts on future health utilization and funding. Dr. Zinich, in 2021, you and your team calculated the direct medical costs of individuals with obesity to be 100% higher than those of normal weight. Aggregate medical costs due to obesity among adults in the United States, you estimated at $260.6 billion. Today, that's 7.9% of US national medical expenditure. Can you put into context just how significant it is to have the treatments that we currently do for obesity, and perhaps what is the best case scenario for not just our health and service member effectiveness, but also the amount that taxpayers in our nation is paying for late stage treatments for these complications?
Yeah, thanks for that great question, Courtney. I mean, yeah, the evidence is very strong that the economy, we're already paying for the cost of obesity, right? And you know, you mentioned 100% higher for those living with severe obesity. It's actually 233% higher cost. So this is a significant economic problem as well. And from an investment perspective, the simple answer is we don't invest in obesity the same way we invest in other chronic diseases. So not at all. It's not even close. You know, and given that the proportion of the population that lives with the disease of obesity, it's even more disproportionate, right? For almost half of the population, civilian population, 20% of the military population, we just see that incongruence of awareness, advocacy, investment in disease states. I did a quick search of what other disease states see from annual investments in awareness or research. In breast cancer, they see over 6 billion annually. In diabetes research, they see over 2.5 billion annually. When I did an obesity awareness funding search, I couldn't even find anything. I couldn't find a data point to share with you. And then when I did the research funding search, there was approximately $1 million dedicated, specifically direct funding to obesity that I could find to reference. So I think the simple answer is we need to invest more. The government, especially the DoD, needs to start investing more in the education, awareness, and treatment of this very serious chronic disease that affects The active duty service members, their families, and their, you know, their dependents, their kiddos might be living with obesity too. So it's really, I think, a holistic view is warranted here.
And we know that after a person, whether in childhood or adulthood, exceeds a certain body fat threshold for a period of time, and of course, this is completely dependent on the individual and their body and brain chemistry, but certain brain and hormonal dysfunctions impair metabolism and increase appetite, leading to recurring weight gain in most people, despite their best efforts and despite lifestyle interventions over time. And yet, when we in briefings as ASP bring up the possibility of soldiers needing lifelong medications or counseling or surgery to return individuals with obesity to a healthy weight, legislators and commanders balk, right, at this price because they see it as an upfront investment. And sometimes they don't even see it as that. They may have a preferred solution that is the same as the one that's been proposed for over 20 years, right? Tell troops to eat less and exercise more, even if that only works for some. And it's hard to see these types of longer term impacts when your own responsibility is very niche in this large system, and you may not be in the position that you're in for very long. So thank you for bringing up that important facet. I think it seems clear that there are structural interventions or systems changes that are going to be needed to ensure that medication doesn't become, as I heard at a great Global Liver Institute panel this summer, a means of, quote, mopping the floor while the faucet is still on. Practically, that leaders in the military and in the public are concerned that medication or surgery will become easy solutions while the underlying problem of how people are acquiring obesity still hasn't been solved. So many individuals around the world are acquiring obesity for the first time. And in knowing this, it appears critical to emphasize that obesity prevention is a vital component of any obesity management program. Dr. Alexander, as we promote effective treatments for this brain and hormonal dysfunction, do you know of any evidence-based best practices for obesity prevention in large civilian populations that might be applied to military environments?
Yes, I would say that there's so many different ways that we can tackle the discussion around obesity. And part of it, and I saw as part of the Q&A there, is to have people first language to talk about obesity as a disease and not to refer to a person as being obese, because as other panelists here have mentioned, there's a stigmatization where people don't want to come out, don't want to talk about this issue because there's a lot of shame and blame that happens, and so it sort of stays hidden. And people grapple with it on their own. Do not have the comprehensive obesity care, either from a prevention standpoint or from a treatment standpoint, to access, or may not know that it's there. And I think it's important for waist circumference. BMI is not at all a perfect measure of what one's overall bodily health looks like, but as a screening measure, it can be very effective. After that, we have to look at other ways of addressing it, but to have this as a vital sign, to look and to say, hey, I see that your weight trajectory is increasing. We know that, for instance, a person who is, let's say, 70 inches tall and has a BMI of 23, if they were to reach a BMI of 27, they would gain about 30 pounds. And that's quite a lot of weight for the body to take. If we were to go to 30, it's about a 50-pound weight gain to go from a BMI that's considered normal, healthful, and so forth. And so why wait until we actually hit those BMIs that are causing hundreds of different diseases, are predisposing us to so many different chronic conditions that are the bread and butter of what primary care treats, whether in the military or outside of the military in today's society, and has the possibility of bankrupting the system, as has been noted, because we're sort of passing the buck in the civilian arena. We are passing the buck because of this turnover from from insurance to insurance. The military actually has the ability not to do that because you stay within this ecosystem. And so offering comprehensive obesity care that does include talking about physical activity, does talk about nutrition, about behavioral health, which is incredibly important, the type of stress that the military personnel are under, the sleep deprivation, the change in sleep patterns, what's expected of people, a culture of not coming forth when you have an issue that may be small, waiting for it to be to be larger before you come and have it addressed. And so making it okay to see somebody for a wellness exam, to ensure that if something small is happening, that we can nip it in the bud, I think is really important. So that type of education is important. As part of the Obesity Medicine Association, which is the largest clinical society, medical association in the United States, we have about 6,000 clinicians who treat obesity. And a lot of different resources to help primary care providers, whether in the military or outside of the military, learn more about this. We do provide information and training modules for medical schools, for residency programs, and the same is true and can be provided for military personnel, so that they understand that this is a longitudinal issue. It's not different than treating major depressive disorder and realizing that that's different than sadness, which is something that passes, and that it needs some type of bigger a bigger comprehensive approach, and may need medications, but medications alone, as has been mentioned, are not the panacea. We cannot just prescribe them and walk away, but we cannot just tell people that intensive lifestyle interventions as foundational treatment are the beginning, the middle, and the end of treatment. Also, we really have to treat obesity as obesities. They're multifactorial. People get to them in a lot of different ways. When metabolic dysfunction occurs, it's there, and we need to manage it and work with it across time. But for prevention, we have to start having these conversations much earlier, and it's so much easier to prevent the condition than to try to to rebuild that machinery, which may not be possible to rebuild once it's broken.
And that's a really important point. I think when people imagine having a BMI of 30 or a body fat percent of 30 kilograms per meter squared, they think, well, that's the point at which I need to start worrying about my health, right? And in the US military, there's pretty frequent theories that are flung around that say, well, 30 BMI isn't necessarily where we need to be because it's inaccurate. And the truth is, yes, on an individual level, it can be quite inaccurate. But instead of looking at the situation for what it is, people will say things like, that's why we need to throw out BMI entirely, or this is why it doesn't work for service members. And they'll say right afterwards, pretty much every single time, everyone is just so muscular, or everybody just is so fit that BMI doesn't work for them. And I go back to why BMI was created and the target population that it was created for. And you're looking at Caucasian men between the ages of 18 and 35. And that is a lot of our military population. Those are not the individuals who are most at risk of having a BMI be inaccurate for them, right? Because the system was literally designed for them. In truth, there are people from different ethnic backgrounds and racial backgrounds that their obesity threshold might be something like 27 or 25.5, and that's when they start experiencing obesity-related complications, and have higher cardiovascular risk, increased blood sugar and blood pressure, and all of these things that we want to look at. So it's really important that we're not saying, oh, BMI doesn't count for service members, or it doesn't matter for service members. It shouldn't be relied on as a panacea, like you mentioned, but it also shouldn't be something that is completely useless on a population level, simply because that is still the threshold at which many providers recognize, we need to get serious, and not just this is the point at which maybe some people will start to experience symptoms. So thank you for bringing that up. And Dr. Corrado, this is another area where we are trying to apply leading civilian practices and strategies to the unique environment of military service. What structural changes need to be introduced, in your opinion, in the Department of Defense that can prevent normal weight service members from reaching that threshold at which certain neurohormonal changes are either irreversible or very difficult to reverse?
Sure. So I think it's a challenge, right? So there's so many factors that drive someone's susceptibility to the disease of obesity. I think some of them people, are born with, some of it's incurred in utero, some of it's epigenetic, some of it's, happened in childhood will then come to life once you're under certain stressors within the military system, right? Whether that's the disordered eating behaviors that happen prior to the weigh-ins, whether it's the stress from deployments in combat or moving every 2 to 3 years, whether that is from the varying sleep schedules and circadian rhythm disruptions, or medications used to treat anxiety and depression. I mean, I feel like the comprehensive approach is, so one, the military has something called Total Force Fitness, which is promoted at all branches. And, I think from in its concept is very important. So it focuses on, at the unit level, talking about the importance of good nutrition, talking about the importance of physical activity, spirituality, sleep, stress management, etc. I feel like though, as part of that, it really needs to be addressed that weight sometimes can still be a challenge and a struggle, despite all these necessary best efforts that you're putting forward in terms of the lifestyle. And so I think that, the DoD really needs to come out and say, obesity is a disease. We're going to treat it as a disease. If you are doing all these things right at the unit level or the lifestyle things, and you're still not meeting where you need to be from a health perspective, we want you to seek medical care. I think the hard part within the Department of Defense, and really honestly across the world right now, is that providers there's a shortage of providers, particularly in the military health system. And so saying that every single person who fails their body composition or weight or their weigh-ins should go to a medical provider to have an evaluation and be, thoroughly evaluated for obesity complications or be treated is somewhat of a challenge, because we just don't have enough appointments and providers to do that, nor do we have enough experienced providers with knowledge on how to do all of that. I think we are within the DoD system helping improve that. We're having an obesity symposium that's a 2-day session teaching providers. I get emailed probably once a day asking about how do I create an obesity medicine clinic within our own primary care clinic? How do I treat patients? So I think people are wanting to know, but I think it's hard also too, because we don't have the infrastructure to also support all of these things that we want people to do. I think speaking to one of the comments too in the question about, is the DoD looking at different ways to measure indications for taping and body composition? The answer is yes. Varying branches have different ways in which they are trying to measure or determine obesity. So instead of just using a BMI alone or your waist circumference, some organizations like the Marines are starting to use DEXA scans for everyone, which is the gold standard for body composition. A lot of Army installations have bioimpedance devices like the InBody 770s to help measure body composition. I think the problem, and Courtney and I talk about this a lot, is we can diagnose people with obesity via these metrics, but if you're not going to then refer them to a provider to be evaluated for obesity-related complications or talk about a holistic treatment plan, then really what's the benefit of doing that? Because, that might, measuring that and saying, hey, you're not falling within standards might not mean that you still can't do your job for the military, depending on what it is. You could probably still do your job. But the question is, are you healthy and well in doing it? And we really need to focus, how do we help people be more healthy and well if they're not meeting these metrics, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and I think it absolutely does. Mr. Pilch, what policy mechanisms and federal funding mechanisms can be leveraged to increase the number of either obesity specialists or just resources in general available for some of these systems? Not just for insurance, but maybe for the defense health care system as a whole, right? Are there congressional or legislative mechanisms? I'm thinking TROA or NDAA amendments that can empower and increase in capacity so that doctors and specialists like Dr. Corrado can reach as many people as possible and help as many service members as possible? And if so, are there any challenges, for instance, pushbacks from people who are more maybe fiscally conservative or who maybe don't see the vision of investing early in obesity identification and treatment? Apologies, it seems like you are muted.
Sorry. Okay, sorry. There, these are terms I don't necessarily agree with, but there were a couple of quote chronic, foundational chronic disease states. Sleep, I heard sleep mentioned, and obesity being a second one. Okay, sleep management and all that goes with it. Ironically or not ironically, both of these key considerations, foundational health, that affect gaps in care for people and or their overall morbidity, have too few qualified providers to get the access to them. So with due respect to all primary care physicians, not all primary care physicians are qualified to be doing this work, just like they're not qualified to be doing sleep management, okay? But our system, our healthcare delivery system, has put a tremendous burden on the primary care as a quote gatekeeper. I'm using, and they're being measured on these things. So the insurance companies, and others have to stop thinking about these referrals as something that goes against quote value-based reimbursement, right? These are all things. But the need for training for some of these primary care physicians who learn about things like sleep, things like obesity, these foundational considerations, so that there is access and that they are better qualified to pick even the right drug if it's going to be a GLP-1. We've heard mention of, a lot of what's gone on here. Interestingly enough, if you look at this from a step back, the GLP-1s were originally created for diabetes management. So these were additional indications or what we call off-label use, right? We sort of fell our way into this bad analogy, but Botox was originally created for migraines, and the off-label use has been something very different. So the process for one of the issues for getting this approved has been understanding the clinical indications. And part of the challenge in that is who's giving them the clinical indications, not necessarily physicians and other providers who are fully astute at what this all means. Okay. So the criticalities go to the training and educating of the provider community, whether in the DoD or outside the DoD, as well as what's going to be accessible, the number of the treatment plan that goes with it. Someone mentioned behavioral health. There are so many behavioral health issues potentially tied in here, whether it be anxiety, depression, etc. Again, same thing with sleep. I keep using that analogy, but these are two. If you look at all of the musculoskeletal, cardio-diabesity, women's health, the things that these firms are looking at, right? That the big clinical managers are looking at. They're tied to each other. Very rarely does someone have one single chronic disease state. So the question becomes, which one do we use as a front door to manage first, to start to help the person feel better about themselves, feel better physically, get on their journey to better health? And how do we continue them through? So hopefully I answered it for you, Courtney, but I think this is an education and resource standpoint that the three doctors on this podcast know more than I do about what how those resources could be put together, deployed, and operationalized. but we really have a shortage of fully qualified providers that can identify the right treatment plan or the optimal treatment plan. There's not a right and a wrong, and how to make it work for their patient.
Thank you. And I see two hands, so we'll start with Dr. Corrado and then go to Dr. Alexander.
Thanks. So I think one of the things to think about is the Defense Health Agency is actually moving away from an RVU-based model and towards a quality metric model. And one of the quality metrics they're going to be focused on is obesity. And so I think that should hopefully help push the agenda and moving and advancing treatment options. I think another good idea for ways to expand education to providers to help increase coverage and access for patients across the MHS is really doing some sort of like Project Echo based kind of clinic. And so I am trying to pitch to many others within the DHA to support kind of a Project Echo stance, which is where, you know, whether it's at our comprehensive weight management clinic here at Walter Reed or at another location, having multiple providers who are board certified in obesity medicine, familiar with how to do this, help have consultative hours or days to where they can help providers who are learning how to do this, you know, do it on an individual basis so they can bounce their ideas off of myself or others, and we can help them work through kind of some treatment pitfalls and et cetera for individualized patients. I find that, you know, once you start doing this in clinical practice and you get some, you understand and you kind of your hands wet, you start to learn a whole lot more and it becomes easier. And I think just having a resource as a person or a couple people to bounce ideas off of and consult with can be really helpful, at least for the DoD. And I think easy to put in place and not too costly.
And I think part of that is breaking down the silos we mentioned earlier. And Mr. Pilch, you did address that there are people who with critical decision-making powers in this system who are not themselves doctors or medical professionals, or if they are medical professionals, they may not be trained the right way to recognize what the right solution is, and yet they're still given quite a bit of authority to impose influence over this entire system, including the insurance, and then also who receives care and what silos receive the most funding. Dr. Alexander?
Yeah, I would add, and Dr. Corrado very wonderfully stated the concept of Project Echo as well. We know that first and foremost, destigmatize obesity and obesity care, get people in the door, understand that it is something that is treatable, is the first thing. The second is to improve the fragmented ecosystem in which we care for obesity, where you have, and I think again, it was Dr. Corrado who mentioned this, where someone comes in, and also I believe that you mentioned it as well, Courtney. Someone comes in, we identify it, and then what are we going to do with it? And so we have to understand that there are different stages and levels of obesity. There are a couple different ways to stage it. The EOSS, the Edmonton Obesity Staging System, is one of those. And so we can understand if we're being more preventative and it's a stage 0 or a 1 or a 2 that perhaps could be treated in primary care, we could do that and then understand to treat and then refer to a higher level of care when the obesity is sort of out of the realm of primary care, and the resources, the expertise, the time is not there to treat it. And so I think what we have to do, and I think the military is actually quite good at this, is developing protocols and following those protocols, soup to nuts, and understanding that when we treat this chronic condition, we are treating the roots rather than the fruits of many of the chronic care issues that then come up. When we're treating weight, when we're treating this metabolic dysregulation, we're also treating hypertension, we're treating sleep apnea, we're treating everything else. And so if we would hit the root cause, we're actually doing our job. We're doing all the things that we're trained to do. And when we get sort of out of our, over our skis, then we can send it to a higher level of care. And right now, the American Board of Obesity Medicine has been around since 2013 and officially certifying physicians as as specialists in this field, there are 10,000 physicians now that are specialized to treat obesity. It's not very much considering the state of the problem, and that close to 50% of the country is technically qualifies and has obesity. But we do have those specialists, and those specialists can be part of something like Project Echo, and give people the basic, or give physicians and other healthcare providers the basics in terms of how to identify what to do first, next, and then last if they need to refer. Medications that can be causing weight gain. There are a lot of mental health issues and medications that are prescribed that cause that. And we know that it's a slippery slope. It becomes a vicious cycle when one issue begets the next and the next, and then it's off to the races. And if we can reverse this in sort of a virtuous cycle, because we don't have a fragmented care system, we can make a lot of progress in this realm. And then the obvious other aspect of this with comprehensive obesity care is comprehensive funding. To have that funding also not just be a little here, a little there, somebody did this, somebody did that, that we have a protocol, and that we can and that we can follow this protocol across the life cycle of that military personnel, of that veteran, and let them know that it's okay to access the system, and that it exists for them in any way, shape, or form they require it.
Thank you so much. And I especially liked your euphemism, soups to nuts, fruits to roots. When we do briefings on the Hill, these are the kinds of amazing things that we try to use to connect to people, just how important, right, that it is to instigate early and often, not just late stage and once when a service member is already at risk, perhaps of separation or of receiving some disciplinary action for factors mostly outside of their control. Thank you everyone for a really riveting discussion. And to those in the audience today, thank you so much for joining us and for submitting such excellent questions. I apologize we could not get to all of them. If this topic is of interest to you, ASP has released a white paper just this morning called Costs and Consequences, Obesity's Compounding Impact on the Military Health System, which includes many of the factors that we've talked about today, and some more in-depth breakdown and resources that you can look at to read more. It can be read for free at our website at americansecurityproject.org, and we invite you all to give it a read. Thank you again to all of our panelists, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you.
Thank you.